The morning mist clung to the towers of Drakmore Castle like ghostly fingers, and King Alexander Draven stood at the apex of the northern spire, his powerful frame silhouetted against the awakening sky. At 32 years of age, he cut an imposing figure 6.5 feet of corded muscle and barely restrained power, with jet-black hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that shifted between deep amber and molten gold, depending on his mood. Those eyes now surveyed his kingdom of Lycandria, with a mixture of fierce pride and bone-deep wariness that came from bearing the dual burden of being both Alpha of alphas and sovereign of the most powerful nation in the known realms. The weight of the moon crown forged from stellar iron and blessed by the first wolves pressed against his temples, its ancient magic humming in resonance with his bloodline, reminding him constantly that he was the living bridge between the wild and the civilized, between beast and man. 15 years had passed since his father, King Thaddeus the Bold, had fallen in the Battle of Crimson Fields, leaving in 17-year-old Alexander to unite a fractured kingdom while proving his dominance over 12 rival alpha bloodlines, who each believed they had equal claim to the throne. The memories of those early years still haunted him. The challenges fought under the blood moon, the political marriages he'd been forced to reject, the executions he'd ordered of those who wouldn't bend the knee, and most painfully, the loss of his younger brother Marcus to an assassin's poisoned blade meant for Alexander himself. Each scar on his body told a story of survival. Each gray hair that had begun to thread through his dark mane spoke of decisions that had aged him beyond his years. Yet, he had prevailed, transforming Lycandria from a collection of warring wolf packs and human settlements into a unified empire that stretched from the frozen wastes to the Jade Sea, encompassing nearly 3 million souls of various species wolves, humans, fae, and even some of the reformed vampire covens who had sworn fealty to his crown. But power, Alexander had learned, was like holding water in cupped hands. The tighter you gripped, the more it slipped through your fingers. The great hall below him was already filling with petitioners and courtiers, each bringing their own agendas and secret desires. His enhanced senses, a gift and curse of his alpha heritage, allowed him to hear their whispered conspiracies, even from this height. Lord Garrett Silvermane, his own cousin, discussing with the merchant guilds how to circumvent the new taxation laws. Lady Cassandra Nightwhisper, spreading rumors that the king's refusal to take a mate and produce an heir was a sign of weakness. And most troublingly, his trusted general Victor Ironhold, meeting in secret with emissaries from the southern republics, who had never accepted werewolf rule and constantly plotted rebellion. The loneliness of absolute power pressed against him like a physical weight. He could trust no one completely, love no one freely, show weakness to no one ever. Even his wolf, that primal part of his soul that raged against the constraints of civilization, had become harder to control lately, demanding blood, demanding dominance, demanding he stop playing at being human and embrace the beast that was his birthright. The sound of soft footsteps on the stone stairs drew his attention, and, without turning, he knew who approached. Seraphina, the enigmatic oracle of the Northern Temple, and the only person in the kingdom who didn't fear him. She moved with ethereal grace, her silver hair floating as if perpetually underwater, her violet eyes holding depths of knowledge that spanned centuries despite her youthful appearance. The threads of fate are tangling. "My king," she said, without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "The blood eclipse approaches, and with it, the awakening of Malachar the Devourer." Alexander's jaw clenched at the name of the first Alpha King, who had ruled 1,000 years ago, before his hunger for power had transformed him into something monstrous, something that had required the combined might of all races to imprison in the void between worlds. "The seals are breaking," Seraphina continued, moving to stand beside him, her presence oddly comforting, despite the dire news. 3 have already fallen. When the 7th breaks during the blood eclipse, he will return, and he will seek what was denied to Himtha, complete subjugation of all living things to the will of the Alpha Supreme. The prophecy she recited was one every child in Lycandria knew. When blood moon meets black sun, when betrayal comes from trusted hands, when the Alpha King must choose between crown and heart, only then shall the fate of all be decided. Alexander had always dismissed it as ancient superstition, but the genuine fear in Seraphine's usually calm demeanor made his wolf stir uneasily. The emergency council meeting convened in the Chamber of Bonds, a circular room deep within Drakmore Castle, where powerful enchantments prevented any form of deception. Necessary precaution when dealing with beings who could mask their true intentions behind political smiles. The ancient oak table, carved from a single tree that had witnessed the first transformation of man to wolf, dominated the space, and around it sat the most powerful individuals in Lycandria, each representing different factions whose cooperation was essential for the kingdom's survival. General Victor Ironhold, a grizzled veteran whose loyalty Alexander had thought unquestionable until recently, sat rigid in his armor, his weathered face giving away nothing. Lord Commander Lucian Stormclaw of the Royal Guard, whose family had served the Draven line for 3 centuries, fidgeted with barely contained anxiety. Merchant Prince Tobias Goldworth, whose vast wealth funded much of the kingdom's infrastructure, calculated profits and losses behind shrewd eyes. Lady Evangeline Rosehart, master of spies, whose network of informants stretched across continents, watched everyone while appearing to watch no one. And surprisingly, a new addition to the council, Liliana Ashford, a human woman of common birth, whose tactical genius during the recent border skirmishes had earned her a controversial appointment as strategic advisor. Much to the disgust of the pure-blood supremacists, Alexander studied each face carefully as Seraphina repeated her prophecy, his alpha senses attuned to every accelerated heartbeat, every spike of fear scent, every minute, muscle tension that might betray hidden knowledge or guilt. 7 seals, he said, his voice carrying the rumbling undertone that made even the strongest warriors instinctively submit. 3 already broken, and none of my intelligence networks reported this. How? The question hung in the air like a blade, and it was Evangeline who answered, her melodious voice not quite hiding her concern. The breaks occurred in the Forgotten Lands, my king territories beyond our current borders, where even my little birds fear to fly. But I've received disturbing reports of cult activity, groups calling themselves the Heralds of Return, who worship Malachar as the true Alpha King and work to hasten his resurrection. The temperature in the room seemed to drop at this revelation, and Alexander noticed how Victor's hand moved unconsciously to his sword hilt. But was it a defensive gesture, or something more sinister? The debate that followed was heated and revealing, exposing the deep fractures within Alexander's seemingly united kingdom. Lucian argued for immediate military mobilization, wanting to strike at the cult strongholds before they could break more seals, his warrior's instinct demanding action over deliberation. Tobias countered with concerns about the economic impact of war, especially with the harvest season approaching and trade negotiations with the Eastern kingdoms at a crucial juncture. Every gold crown spent on soldiers was one less for infrastructure and development. Victor surprisingly advocated for a diplomatic approach, suggesting they reach out to the southern republics and even the vampire courts for alliance, arguing that Malachar's return threatened all races equally. But it was Liliana who provided the most intriguing perspective, her clear voice cutting through the masculine posturing with surgical precision. "You're all thinking like generals and merchants," she said, earning glares from several council members. But Malachar was imprisoned, not killed, for a reason. What if the seals aren't just failing? What if someone is deliberately breaking them? Someone who stands to gain from the chaos of his return. For green eyes met Alexander's golden ones meaningfully, and he saw in them a sharp intelligence that matched his own, along with something else, a complete lack of fear, that he found both refreshing and oddly attractive. The meeting was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Alexander's personal guard, their urgency immediately apparent. "Your Majesty," the captain gasped, Prince Damien Blackfire, of the Eastern Kingdoms, has arrived with a war fleet. He claims to come in peace, but the captain hesitated, and Alexander growled impatiently. He brings news of the fourth seal, my king. It was broken 3 days ago, and the magical backlash has already begun. Plague in the eastern provinces, unnatural storms, and worse. The dead are beginning to rise in the border towns. The council erupted in chaos, but Alexander's mind was racing with a more personal concern. Damien Blackfire wasn't just any foreign prince. He was Alexander's former lover, the one person who had ever truly understood the isolation of power, the one he had been forced to reject 5 years ago, when political necessity demanded. He remained unmated to keep the various factions in balance. Their relationship had ended in bitter acrimony, with Damien swearing he would one day return to claim what was his. Now, with the kingdom facing its greatest threat, the last person Alexander wanted to deal with, perhaps the one he needed most, had arrived at his doorstep with an army at his back and secrets in his heart. Prince Damien Blackfire entered the throne room like a force of nature, his presence immediately commanding attention and stirring something primal in Alexander that he had spent 5 years trying to bury. Where Alexander was dark and brooding, Damien was golden and radiant, sun-kissed skin, hair like spun gold, and eyes the color of sapphires that held both warmth and calculation in equal measure. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, his lean but powerful build evident even beneath the elaborate court dress of the Eastern Kingdoms. And when he smiled, it was with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what effect he had on others. But Alexander's wolf sensed something different about him. Now a new power thrumming beneath his skin, ancient and dangerous, that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Alexander," Damien said, his voice like aged whiskey, smooth and intoxicating. "I see you've been busy playing king while the world burns around you." The insult was delivered with such casual charm that several courtiers actually laughed before catching themselves, remembering whose presence they were in. The private meeting that followed, held in Alexander's study, with only Seraphina and Liliana present as witnesses, revealed truths that shook the foundations of everything Alexander believed. Damien had not come as conqueror, but as harbinger, bearing ancient texts from the library of first memories that told the true story of Malaker's imprisonment. He wasn't corrupted by power, Damien explained, spreading out scrolls covered in languages that predated human civilization. He was trying to prevent something worse, the return of the Void Princes, entities from before creation that feed on reality itself. The transformation that made him monstrous was actually a desperate attempt to become powerful enough to stand against them. The seals that imprison him also hold them at bay, and someone is deliberately breaking them, thinking they're freeing a weapon they can control. The implications were staggering. Malaker was released without proper preparation, without the binding rituals that would restore his sanity. He would indeed become the monster of legend, but worse. His freedom would also unleash the Void Princes upon an unprepared world. "And you know this, how?" Alexander demanded, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin at having his former mate so close yet untouchable. Damien's expression turned serious, and for the first time since entering, he showed vulnerability. "Because my grandmother was one of the mages who created the seals. Her bloodline carries the memory of that binding, passed down through genetic magic. When the fourth seal broke, I experienced her memories, all of them, including the identity of the traitor who's breaking the seals." He paused, sapphire eyes meeting golden ones with an intensity that made Alexander's breath catch. "It's someone in this room. Someone you trust implicitly. Someone who has been playing a game so long and so carefully that even your wolf hasn't sensed the deception." Before anyone could react to this bombshell, the temperature in the room plummeted, frost spreading across the windows despite the summer heat. Outside, a voice, ancient and amused, echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "How clever of you, little prince, but not clever enough." The shadows in the room began to writhe and coalesce, and from them stepped Victor Ironhold. But not, as they knew him, his eyes now held depths of darkness that spoke of possession, or worse, willing collaboration with forces beyond mortal understanding. The confrontation that erupted was swift and brutal, shattering the carefully maintained peace of the castle. Victor, or the thing wearing his face, moved with inhuman speed, ancient magics crackling around him as he fought with the skill of 1,000 years of combat experience. "You never suspected," he laughed, as he parried Alexander's claws with a blade of pure shadow. 40 years I've worn this face, guided your father's decisions, shaped your rise to power, all to ensure you would be strong enough to face Malachor, when I freed him, strong enough to kill him and break the final seal from the inside. The battle raged through the study, Centauri's old books bursting into flame, priceless artifacts shattering as the two titans clashed. Damien joined the fight, revealing his own hidden nature as he partially transformed into something that wasn't quite wolf, but something older, more primal, a golden dragon, one of the legendary word dragons, thought extinct for millennia. Liliana, proving her worth beyond doubt, coordinated their attacks with tactical precision, while Seraphina wove protective barriers that kept the dark magic from spreading beyond the room. The fight ended, not with victory, but with Victor, badly wounded but not defeated, dissolved into shadow and fled. But not before delivering a parting curse. The 5th seal breaks at midnight, the 6th at dawn, and the 7th. The 7th requires the blood of an Alpha King, willing or not. Tick-tock, Your Majesty. The race against time that followed pushed Alexander and his unlikely alliance to their absolute limits as they fought to prevent the remaining seals from breaking, while simultaneously preparing for the inevitable return and the potential unleashing of the Void Princes. The journey to the 6th seal, hidden beneath the ruins of the First City, became a crucible that forged disparate individuals into a unified force. Through ancient catacombs, filled with traps both mechanical and magical, facing guardians that tested not just their combat prowess but their moral character, the group dynamics evolved in unexpected ways. Liliana's strategic brilliance complemented Alexander's raw power perfectly, her human perspective offering solutions his wolf-dominant thinking would never have conceived. Meanwhile, the forced proximity with Damien rekindled feelings Alexander had tried to bury, their old chemistry complicated by new revelations. Damien's dragon heritage meant he could match Alexander as an equal, something the Alpha King had never experienced before. Even Seraphina revealed hidden depths, her oracular powers growing stronger as they approached the seal, allowing her to guide them through temporal mazes where past, present, and future intersected in mind-bending ways. The 6th seal's guardian proved to be not a monster, but a mirror-reach member of the group, faced a reflection of their darkest potential, what they could become if they chose power over principle. Alexander confronted a version of himself that had fully embraced the beast, ruling through fear and violence, his kingdom a charnel house of absolute dominion. The battle was internal as much as external, forcing him to acknowledge that his greatest enemy wasn't Malachor or Victor, but the constant temptation to solve problems through force rather than wisdom. It was Liliana who helped him break through, her voice reaching him through the madness. A true king doesn't rule over corpses and ruins. Strength without mercy is just brutality with a crown. Her words, combined with Damien's presence, the golden dragon fighting desperately to reach him through the magical maze, gave Alexander the clarity to reject the dark path, shattering the mirror and revealing the 6th seal. But they were too late to prevent its breaking. Victor had sent cultists to perform the ritual remotely, and as the seal shattered, the sky itself seemed to scream, reality warping as things that should not exist began pushing through from the void. The final confrontation came at the place where it all began, the Valley of First Howling, where legend said the original Alpha had been blessed or cursed with the gift of transformation. The blood eclipse hung overhead like a crimson eye, watching as two armies faced each other across the ancient battlefield. On one side stood victors, cultists, and mercenaries, bolstered by creatures pulled from the void's edge, their very presence causing reality to fray. On the other, Alexander's forces, not just his military, but a coalition that included Damien's Eastern Dragons, the Southern Republics that Liliana had convinced to join them, the vampire courts, seeking to prevent mutual annihilation, and even common citizens who had taken up arms to defend their world. The battle was apocalyptic in scope, the clash of mundane steel and supernatural power, creating a cacophony that could be heard kingdoms away. Through it all, Alexander fought toward the center where the seventh seal lay exposed, knowing that Victor intended to use his blood to break it, whether he consented or not. The climax came when Molocher himself manifested, not fully freed, but present enough to speak, and his words changed everything. "You fools," the ancient Alpha King said, his voice carrying across the battlefield and stopping combatants in their tracks. "The seals were never my prison. They were my willing sacrifice. I transformed myself into a living barrier against the Void Princes, and Victor has been trying to break that barrier, not to free me, but to unleash them upon this world." The revelation that Victor was actually a Void Prince in human guise, one who had been trapped on this side of reality, when Molocher created his barrier, recontextualized the entire conflict. The solution, when it came, required the ultimate synthesis of everything Alexander had learned.